Stuff there during our carrier updates today. Right now, we're going to welcome our next live guest. We've got Matt Trapp with us from the Harbor Trucking Association for some continued perspective on what's going on in California with the AB5 legislation. So, Matt, thank you for joining us today. And we're excited to talk to you about this because you guys kind of have this firsthand perspective as well. What are you seeing right now from impacts from the port protests?
Well, number one, thank you for having me again on this morning, and good morning, good afternoon to all your listeners out there. Obviously, no shortage of challenges out here in California to begin with. As the CTA had said, now the ruling has effectively thrown gasoline onto the supply chain crisis out here in California. Last week, we saw several trucker protest actions ranging from them slow rolling or stopping on the 710 and I-10 interstates, which are coming in and out of the ports of and Long Beach, and then as well as Oakland this week so far. What we're hearing, boots on the ground perspective, is that the port has practically been entirely shut down. So while there is some trickle in of trucks here and there under a interval schedule, or for all intents and purposes, Port of Oakland has been effectively closed because of these actions.
And Matt, are there any surprises that have kind of unfolded from the situation, or has everything kind of gone really according to what you expected?
Well, I'll tell you that, these protests have been completely organic. They've started on social media from a few different groups, Facebook, Instagram, kind of driving home to some of the drivers what these impacts of AB5 could potentially be. And these drivers, these independent men and women, these entrepreneurs who have decided to take things into their own hands are doing so under, I believe, the fact that there really is no clear guidance, no clear pathway in how you can comply with AB5 outside of becoming an employee driver, or working rather for a company that has employee drivers, which there's thousands of those open opportunities, and there has been for many years, as all of us in the industry know. Trucking companies are always looking for qualified drivers. That is no secret. So right now, because of the fact that the only clear, surefire pathway for compliance with AB5 is to have an employee driver model or employee-based model, that these independent owner-operator, truck owners are fearful that that's the only pathway ahead for them, because there just has been little, if any, specific guidance issued by the state of California so far.
So that's a great point that you bring up, is the fact that a lot of folks are just kind of seeking clarity on what the law means and what that means for their future earning potential, and how they're going to have to adjust their working status to comply with that. You mentioned that there hasn't really been any clarity coming down from the state of California, but did Governor Gavin Newsom issue a statement about this? And has there been any pressure to take it back up to the top level of California state government and find some type of intervention in this?
I have not seen a statement directly from Governor Newsom himself, while I've seen some statements from officials within his organization, which basically boiled down to the rule has been around since 2020. Everyone has had plenty of time to comply, and, more or less expect some level of enforcement to be coming your way sooner than later. Ourselves, in an effort led by the California Trucking Association, had sent a letter to his office along with 70 other groups asking for two specific things. Number one, a brief stay of enforcement while we, number two, get around a table with labor, with the departments who would be charged with enforcing this, to hash out some specifics in how this could be applied to trucking fleets or brokers who are utilizing independent trucking firms, independent owner-operators, without fear of some type of legal reprisal. Just by virtue of having your operating authority as a small fleet owner-operator does not guarantee that the folks that you're working for, working with, contracting with, wouldn't be immune from some type of legal action against them. And of course, we have to worry about, as I like to call them, the container chasing attorneys out there, who no doubt have a very long list of motor carriers that they're looking to go after for violation of the ABC test. And unfortunately, the reports that I'm getting is that this law is retroactive back to January 2020, despite the fact that the injunction has been in place since January 13th of that year. So lots of concern, lots of, I guess, confusion out here. And it's obvious the frustration that these drivers feel that having their livelihoods ripped away from them. These are entrepreneurial men and women who have used this pathway to provide for their families. Now they feel that they're being tossed aside.
So, with that enforcement, what does that look like if there's any type of clarity on that side? Is it going to be kind of independent contractors continuing to run as normal, running the risk of being audited and finding out that they're breaking the law? Or, as you mentioned, the container chasing attorneys who are just going to come down and say, you know what, we know that you're operating like this, and then throw them into a legal battle? Or are there potential for criminal penalties? Or do we even know?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily the drivers themselves. It would be the companies that they're working with. And so that's where the threat comes in, is that there's no clarity in how those companies are going to be treated. Now, criminal versus civil proceedings, I can't tell you. I believe that it would be on the civil side. And of course, in some private right of action usually results in monetary penalties and a business model change. These lawsuits are not something that anyone takes lightly. Over the past several years, there have been hundreds of misclassification lawsuits levied against trucking companies who thought that they were doing the right thing, but the plaintiffs' attorneys had convinced drivers that they were going to be cashing in for back wages and whatnot. And the unfortunate reality is the lawyers make the money, the drivers end up with pennies on the dollar, so to speak, from what they were promised. And why that's an issue is that it's very likely that a major settlement or a major legal action against a trucking company will effectively put it out of business. So these drivers, although that the law doesn't necessarily say that they're going to get in trouble, the companies that they're working with are under threat of that. And that's where the lack of clarity comes in. Because again, just having your operating authority doesn't matter. We're wondering whether or not that, fleets that are domiciled outside of California who do business in California are also going to be impacted by this. If you take two large asset-based motor carriers, pick the ones that are national top 10 carriers. On its face, the way the law works, that they would not be able to contract with each other for services, yet alone with small independent contractors to supplement them during some of those peak times.
Matt, as you mentioned earlier, there's so many men and women's livelihood, this industry. Do you see this potentially pushing people out of the industry or out of the state altogether into a different region?
Absolutely. I've heard firsthand from some drivers and companies who have spoken to their drivers that that is exactly what is happening, is that there's just a tremendous amount of frustration. You have AB5, you have the ARB rules kicking in at the end of this year, eliminating, the last number I saw was over 100,000 vehicles from service in the state of California. And then on its heels in 1124, the ARB is proposing a zero emission entry standard for all ports and intermodal rail yards in California. And it's difficult for some folks to reconcile how they're going to pay for that new equipment, especially zero emissions. And what we've always said, it's not necessarily the truck, it's where you're going to charge it. All those things piled on top of each other have just been too much for some people, and they're moving to places like Texas, Nevada, Arizona. I mean, even headed out to Georgia and Savannah for some of the opportunities out there that exist within the port operations. So we are hearing that, but it's not as easy for everyone to just pick up and leave. You have roots here, you have family here, you have children in school, so you're forced to comply with the laws, and that's why we need some clarity. We feel that just a conversation related to how this is going to impact the ability of independent drivers to remain independent, as is their choice. We really need that clarity. And I think it's been said once and said can't be said 1,000 times, that this is the United States of America, where we should have choice. We should have freedom of choice to decide what type of business model, especially a model that's been working for many thousands of individuals. Always some bad apples in any industry that you pick your poison, but they're having now the issue where you have a few bad apples trying to spoil the whole bunch. And as I like to say, with AB5, you've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, because nobody really has a choice beyond going to full employment. And these drivers do not want that. If they did, they would already be driving for an employee-based fleet.
Absolutely, Matt. Thank you so much for coming and joining us in this perspective as well. It's great to have you. We'll catch up with you again, I am sure, very soon. Right now, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back with Social Roundabout and then today's edition of Roundtable.